welcome to our deep dive into how to win friends and influence people.
Dale Carnegie.
Yeah, it's practically a cultural phenomenon,
Yeah.
translated into dozens of languages,
It really is.
and still as relevant today as it was almost a century ago.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's one of those books,
Crazy.
you can pick it up at any point in your life.
Yeah.
And just find something valuable in there.
Yeah, we're lucky enough to have excerpts from the book itself.
Right?
So packed with stories.
Yes.
Real-life examples.
Yeah.
To illustrate the principles, we're going to unpack the core insights, the ones that have resonated with readers for generations, and see how they can be applied to your life.
That's the beauty of Carnegie's work. It's timeless. You
Yeah.
know, he taps into something fundamental about human nature,
Yeah.
that desire for connection
Oh, yeah.
and influence.
Absolutely. Okay, let's dive in. I'm already curious about this first principle. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. I have to admit, that sounds a bit counterintuitive. Isn't constructive criticism important?
It can be, but Carnegie makes a compelling case for why criticism often backfires.
Yeah.
And he starts with this fascinating story about Two Gun Crowley,
Oh, yeah, Two-Gun Crowley.
a notorious gangster. He refused to take any responsibility for his actions,
Wow.
even murder.
Oh, wow.
He saw himself as the victim, always justifying his behavior.
Talk about a distorted view of reality.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the point, right? Criticizing someone often makes them defensive,
Yeah.
less receptive to what you're trying to say.
Exactly. It triggers that natural instinct to protect our ego and justify our actions. This story illustrates a crucial point. Criticism, it often triggers defensiveness, making it harder to get your message across. Carnegie argues that understanding this human tendency is key to influencing others effectively.
So instead of criticizing, what does Carnegie suggest we do?
Well, he contrasts Crowley with Abraham Lincoln,
Okay.
who, believe it or not, wasn't always perfect at handling people.
Lincoln making mistakes. That's humbling.
It is.
What happened?
So after the Battle of Gettysburg, Lincoln was furious with General Meade for letting Lee's army escape, and he drafted a scathing letter. But in a moment of wisdom, never sent it.
Why not? Was he worried about, political fallout?
Perhaps, but I think he recognized that the letter wouldn't achieve what he wanted. It would only make Meade defensive and less likely to learn from the experience. Instead, he later wrote to Meade in a completely different tone, acknowledging the challenges Meade faced and focusing on future strategies.
So even Lincoln recognized the futility of harsh criticism. Instead, he chose a more constructive approach, focusing on understanding and improvement rather than blame. I think we can all learn from that. What stands out to you most about this example?
For me, it's a reminder that even the greatest leaders, they're human,
Yeah.
capable of making mistakes. But it's how we handle those mistakes that truly defines us. Lincoln's ability to step back, reassess the situation, and choose a more effective approach is a testament to his emotional intelligence.
That's a great takeaway. It's not about avoiding criticism altogether. It's about approaching it with empathy and a focus on solutions. Now, building on this idea of understanding human nature, Carnegie's second principle is all about appealing to the desire to be important,
Yes.
which he considered this desire a fundamental human drive,
Yeah.
right up there with basic needs like food and shelter. And, if you think about it, it makes sense. Everyone wants to feel valued, recognized, and appreciated.
Of course.
I could definitely relate to that. But how do we tap into this desire in others in a way that's genuine and effective?
So Carnegie illustrates this principle with a story from his own life. As a young man, he wrote letters to famous figures expressing genuine interest in their work. And guess what? He got responses.
Right.
It demonstrated to him the power of sincere curiosity
Wow.
and appreciation.
That's amazing. So simply showing genuine interest in someone can make them feel important. It's such a simple act, yet so powerful.
Right. But it has to be genuine.
Right.
And Carnegie contrasts this with a hilarious example of a poorly written letter from an advertising agency
Okay.
that was all about what the agency wanted,
Yeah.
completely ignoring the recipient's needs and interests.
Ugh. I can imagine how that went down. Talk about a missed opportunity.
It was.
This really highlights the importance of authenticity. Think about the people you enjoy interacting with. What makes them so engaging?
Yeah.
To focus on your interests or their own?
That's a question we should all ask ourselves.
Yeah.
The people who make us feel important are the ones who genuinely listen, who ask questions, and who show a sincere interest in our lives. It's about making that connection.
And speaking of listening, that's Carnegie's next principle.
It is.
Sometimes I wonder if listening is becoming a lost art in our fast-paced, technology-driven world.
I agree, yeah. We're often so busy trying to get our own points across that we forget the power of truly listening to others. But Carnegie highlights the profound impact of making someone feel heard.
Give me an example. I'm all ears.
So he shares this story about a botanist who called him a great conversationalist,
Okay.
even though Carnegie barely spoke during their entire encounter.
Really? So it was Carnegie's listening skills, not his talking,
Yeah.
that impressed the botanist. That's fascinating. But how do we become better listeners?
Yeah.
It's more than just sitting there quietly, right?
Absolutely. It's about active engagement, asking clarifying questions, reflecting back what you've heard, and most importantly, putting aside your own thoughts and truly focusing on the other person's perspective.
I like that. Truly focusing on the other person.
Yeah.
It sounds so simple, yet it's something we often struggle with. And Carnegie doesn't just talk about the importance of listening. He also provides concrete techniques to improve this skill.
Exactly. He emphasizes the importance of maintaining eye contact, using nonverbal cues to show engagement, and resisting the urge to interrupt or offer solutions prematurely.
It's about creating a space where the other person feels safe to share their thoughts and feelings without judgment. Think about a recent conversation where you felt truly listened to. What made that experience so special? How did the other person make you feel?
Yeah, that's a great question to ponder, because often the most impactful conversations are the ones where we feel truly heard and understood. And that's the foundation for building meaningful connections and influencing others in a positive way.
Well said. And speaking of positive influence, Carnegie goes on to outline 6 concrete steps to make people like you.
Right.
These steps are all about putting these principles into action, about turning theory into tangible behaviors that can transform your interactions with others.
Yeah.
All right, let's hear them. What's step number 1?
The first step is surprisingly simple. Smile.
Okay, that sounds easy enough. But does a simple smile really have that much power?
You'd be surprised. Carnegie argues that a genuine smile, it can disarm even the most hardened skeptic. He tells this heartwarming story about Bill, a stockbroker, whose life was completely transformed by simply making a conscious effort to smile more.
Hold on, a stockbroker smiling more. That's not exactly the image that comes to mind.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Bill found that smiling, it not only made him feel better, but it also had this ripple effect on everyone around him.
Really?
People responded more positively, he built stronger relationships with clients, and his overall outlook on life, it improved dramatically.
So a simple smile can actually lead to more success. I'm starting to see the power of this.
It's about creating a positive atmosphere, setting the tone for more constructive and enjoyable interactions. Think about it. When you encounter someone who greets you with a warm smile, it instantly disarms you, right?
Yeah.
And makes you more receptive to what they have to say.
That's so true. Okay, I'm definitely going to be smiling more. What's the next step?
Remembering names.
Oh, remembering names.
It sounds basic, but so many people struggle with it. And yet, it's one of the simplest ways to make someone feel valued and appreciated.
Well, I am absolutely guilty of forgetting names. It's embarrassing. Any tips from Carnegie on how to improve?
Well, he suggests repeating the name several times during the conversation, associating it with the visual feature of the person, and even jotting it down later if it's someone you want to remember long term.
Those are some great strategies.
Yeah.
It's all about making that mental effort to connect the name with the person. And to illustrate the impact of remembering names, Carnegie tells this story of Eunice, a cafeteria worker who had this dramatically positive reaction to simply being addressed by her name.
Yeah, it's such a small gesture, but it communicates respect,
Yeah.
And recognition. It shows that you see the person as an individual, not just someone who serves you lunch.
Right.
And that can make a world of difference in how people respond to you.
It's about making people feel seen, right? Not just invisible cogs in the machine. I love that. Okay, what's the third step to making people like you?
Talk in terms of the other person's interests.
Ooh, now this is where it gets really interesting. Tapping into what people are passionate about.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of how this principle works in practice?
So Carnegie tells this great story about a salesman who finally won over this difficult client by simply taking the time to learn about the client's hobby. Instead of pushing his product, he engaged in a genuine conversation about the client's passion for antique clocks.
So by finding common ground. and showing genuine interest.
Yeah.
The salesman was able to build rapport and create a connection that went beyond, like, the transaction. Brilliant.
Exactly. It wasn't about manipulation, it was about building a genuine relationship.
Right.
And when people feel understood, they're more likely to be open to your ideas and suggestions.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. A lot of these principles are about shifting the focus from ourselves to others. Instead of trying to impress people with our own brilliance, we should be trying to understand them, appreciate them, and help them feel valued.
You're absolutely right. And that's what makes Carnegie's work so powerful. It's not about tricks or manipulation. It's about cultivating genuine human connection. And that brings us to the remaining 3 steps. Being a good listener, encouraging others to talk about themselves, and making the other person feel important, and doing it sincerely.
So in a nutshell, it's about being genuinely interested in others, listening attentively, and acknowledging their value. It's about making them feel like they matter.
Exactly. And these 6 steps are just the foundation. Carnegie goes on to provide even more specific advice on winning people to your way of thinking, on persuading others without being pushy or manipulative.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff.
Right.
How do we persuade people without resorting to, like, forceful tactics?
Well, Carnegie starts with a bold statement.
Okay.
The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it.
Wait, avoid arguments altogether. That seems counterintuitive. Don't we need to stand up for what we believe in?
Of course. Having convictions is important. But Carnegie argues that engaging in, heated arguments, it rarely leads to productive outcomes. Often it just creates resentment and makes the other person dig in their heels even further.
So instead of trying to win the argument, what does he suggest?
He tells this humorous story about Patrick J. O'Hare,
Okay.
a salesman who learned to keep his mouth shut and saw his success soar. Instead of arguing with potential customers, he simply acknowledged their viewpoints and focused on building rapport.
That's fascinating. So by respecting the other person's perspective, if you disagree with it, you create an environment where they're more likely to be open to your ideas.
Exactly. It's not about suppressing your own views. It's about choosing your battles wisely and focusing on creating a win-win situation.
This reminds me of a quote by Stephen Covey.
Okay.
Seek first to understand, then to be understood. It's about building that foundation of mutual respect before trying to persuade someone.
That's a perfect connection. And even Benjamin Franklin, a man known for his intellect and sharp wit, came to realize the futility of heated arguments. He learned that avoiding those confrontations was often the best course of action for achieving his goals.
So it's not about backing down from your principles. It's about choosing a more effective approach.
Right.
And sometimes the most effective approach is to simply listen and acknowledge the other person's perspective.
Absolutely. And that leads us perfectly onto Carnegie's next principle, which is all about the power of admitting wrongs.
Okay. Now, we're not just avoiding arguments. We're actually admitting when we're wrong. Isn't that a bit risky?
It can feel that way, especially in a culture that often values being right above all else. But Carnegie argues that admitting our mistakes, it's ultimately more beneficial than trying to defend them.
I can see how that might be true, but it's definitely counterintuitive. Do you have an example of how this principle works in practice?
So he shares this gripping account of a tax inspector whose anger was completely disarmed by the taxpayer's genuine appreciation for his expertise. Instead of arguing, the taxpayer actually thanked the inspector for pointing out his mistake.
Wow, that's unexpected. What happened next?
So the inspector calmed down, they were able to work through the issue rationally, and the taxpayer even ended up getting a refund.
So admitting fault can actually strengthen our position. It's about turning a potential conflict into a collaborative problem-solving opportunity. That's fascinating. Do you have another example?
Absolutely. Carnegie tells the story of a man who nearly lost his job for arguing with his boss.
Oh, no.
But then he had this brilliant idea. Instead of defending himself, he praised his boss's skills and admitted that he had a lot to learn.
And that saved his job.
It did. His boss was so flattered and disarmed by his humility that he forgave him and even gave him a raise.
That's incredible. So admitting mistakes can not only repair relationships, but also lead to personal and professional growth. It takes courage, but the payoff can be huge. Think about a situation where you could have applied this principle. How might things have unfolded differently if you had acknowledged a mistake instead of defending yourself?
It's a powerful question to consider because often our instinct is to protect our ego, to avoid looking foolish. But true strength lies in our ability to be vulnerable, to acknowledge our imperfections, and to learn from our mistakes.
That's beautifully put. And it makes me wonder, how often do we miss opportunities for growth and connection because we're too afraid to admit when we're wrong? It's definitely something to think about. But for now, let's move on to Carnegie's advice on effective leadership.
Yeah.
This is where he really delves into the psychology of motivation and influence, offering insights that are just as relevant today as they were decades ago.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm ready to take notes. What's the key to effective leadership, according to Carnegie?
So his central principle is this: no one likes to take orders. It's
Yeah.
about recognizing that people are more motivated when they feel a sense of ownership and autonomy, not when they feel controlled or micromanaged.
Well, that's certainly true. But how can you lead effectively without giving directions? How do you get people to do what needs to be done without resorting to commands?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Carnegie highlights the importance of respecting people's autonomy, fostering a collaborative environment, and inspiring rather than demanding.
Do you have an example of a leader who embodied this principle?
So he shares the story of Owen D. Young,
Okay.
this remarkable business leader who rarely gave direct orders. Instead, he offered suggestions, encouraged his team to think independently, and created a culture of shared responsibility.
That sounds like a very empowering leadership style.
Mhm.
And did it work?
It did. Young was incredibly successful, not just in terms of business outcomes, but also in terms of the loyalty and respect he inspired in his employees. He understood that people are more likely to buy into a vision when they feel like they're part of the process, not just following orders.
That's a great point. It's about creating a sense of shared purpose, not just dictating from the top down. And to further illustrate this principle, Carnegie contrasts Young's approach with that of a boss who constantly berated and micromanaged his employees.
Exactly. That boss, despite his good intentions, created an environment of fear and resentment,
Yeah.
His employees became demotivated, their productivity plummeted, and the team dynamics suffered.
It's a classic example of how fear-based leadership can backfire.
It can.
It's so important to create an environment where people feel respected, trusted, and empowered to contribute their best work. What leadership styles have you encountered in your own life?
Oh, wow.
How have they impacted your motivation and performance?
That's a great question to reflect on.
Yeah.
Because we've all experienced different leadership styles, some positive, some not so positive. And it's fascinating to consider how those experiences have shaped our own beliefs about leadership and teamwork.
I think the key takeaway here is that effective leadership is not about wielding power or giving orders.
Right.
It's about inspiring, empowering,
Mm.
and creating a shared vision that everyone can get behind.
Well said. And this brings us to one of Carnegie's most powerful and enduring principles: the importance of making people feel important.
Okay, I'm really curious about this one. How do we make others feel valued without resorting to, empty flattery or insincere praise?
So Carnegie emphasizes the importance of sincerity and genuine appreciation. It's about recognizing and acknowledging the unique qualities and contributions of each individual. He tells this heartwarming story about an elderly aunt who gifted her prized Packard to her nephew. And it wasn't because he was the closest relative, but because he was the only one who truly admired it.
That's so sweet. It shows that sometimes the smallest gestures of recognition can have a profound impact.
And they can.
It's about seeing the value in others, even when they don't see it in themselves.
And it's not just about material things. It's about appreciating people's talents, efforts, and perspectives. He shares this other anecdote about Louisa May Alcott,
Oh, Louisa May Alcott.
the author of Little Women, who agreed to write for a publication at a very low fee because the payment was being directed to her favorite charity.
So it wasn't about the money for her. It was about contributing to a cause she believed in. That's inspiring. It shows that making others feel important can be as simple as acknowledging their values and supporting their passions.
Exactly. And this principle applies to all aspects of our lives,
Yeah.
not just our professional careers.
Right.
Think about your personal relationships, your interactions with friends, family, even strangers.
Yeah.
How can you apply this principle to enhance those connections?
It's a great question to ponder. What small gestures can we make that acknowledge the value of those around us? It doesn't have to be grand or expensive.
Right.
It's the thought that counts.
You're right. A simple compliment, a heartfelt thank you, a genuine expression of interest. These seemingly small acts can make a world of difference in how people feel about themselves and about you.
And you know what's really amazing about these principles? They're not just about getting what we want from others. They're about cultivating a more positive and fulfilling way of interacting with the world.
That's what makes Carnegie's work so enduring. It's
Right.
about more than just winning friends and influencing people, you know?
Yeah.
It's about becoming better human beings, about creating a more compassionate and connected world.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dives into this incredible book. But before we go, I have one final thought-provoking question for you, our listener. Now that you've had a glimpse into the power of these principles, where do you see the greatest opportunity for applying them in your life? What's one small change you could make today to start putting these ideas into action?
That's the real challenge, isn't it? You know, it's not enough to just understand these principles. We have to actually apply them.
Right.
And the beauty of Carnegie's work is that it offers like practical, actionable advice that we can start using immediately.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to try to overhaul your entire personality overnight, you know.
No.
Start small. Focus on one principle that resonates with you. And be consistent. Even small changes can have a ripple effect on your relationships and your overall well-being.
And remember, it's not about becoming someone you're not. It's about becoming the best version of yourself, the kind of person who can build genuine connections and make a positive impact on the world.
And if you're eager to explore these ideas further, I highly encourage you to check out How to Win Friends and Influence People for yourself. We've only scratched the surface of the wisdom it contains. It's a book that can truly change your life if you let it.
It's one of those books that you can return to again and again throughout your life and always find something new and valuable.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the timeless principles of human connection.
It's been a pleasure. Remember, these principles aren't just about winning friends and influencing people, you know. They're about building a more compassionate and fulfilling life for yourself and those around you. Start small, be consistent, and watch those positive ripple effects unfold.
That's a perfect note to end on. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep connecting.